The Boston Bruins put a real lump of coal in our stockings by losing 4 in a row heading into the Christmas break, 5 of their last 6 overall. Is this expected regression, or is it a sign of things to come and reason to be concerned? Let's talk about it on today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Tuesday, December 26th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is indeed Boxing Day. The World Juniors are up and running over in Sweden with our boy Matt Poitras in action for Team Canada. I hope you all had a fantastic holiday weekend and that Santa was good to you as well. Maybe you got some Bruins tickets. Maybe you got some Bruins jerseys or gear. Let me know by hitting me up at Ian C. McLaren or at Locked NHL Bruins on social media. Would love to see the Bruins stuff that you got. Now, it wasn't the most peaceful holiday for the Boston Bruins, as they are dealing with a bit of a losing streak here. 4 games in a row heading into the holiday break. 5 of their past 6 games overall, and they have not won in regulation since a 5-3 decision over the Arizona Coyotes back on December 9th. Here's how things went heading into the break. On December 13th, they lost 2-1 to the New Jersey Devils in overtime. They beat the New York Islanders in a thriller on December 15th in a shootout. Then they lost 2-1 to the New York Rangers on the 16th of December. That one was in overtime. A 4-3 overtime loss to the Minnesota Wild on December 19th. And then in 2 games right before the break, losing back-to-back in regulation. 5-1 to the Winnipeg Jets and 3-2 to the Minnesota Wild. So that's 2 losses there to the Wild overall. Now the Bruins, since the beginning of December, kind of a middle-of-the-pack team. They have 11 points, which puts them 22nd in the NHL since the beginning of December. 4-3-3, a .550 point percentage, which puts them in 18th. They have a negative 5 goal differential, and they're allowing half a goal more per game than they are generating since December 1st. And it gets even more troubling if you zoom in again over the last couple weeks, where they have won only 1 game in regulation and have lost 5 of their past 6. Now, 4 of those games were overtime or shootout decisions, meaning they're still picking up points. But those last 2 games, both regulation losses, and perhaps a bit more cause for concern. And we'll discuss that later on here, whether or not this is just natural regression or indeed cause for concern. But let's be clear, the Minnesota Wild, yeah, they're not the greatest team in the NHL, but they have been playing very, very well since making a coaching change. Dean Evason was fired. John Hines came in. Since December 1st, they're 8-3 with a .727 point percentage, which puts them 5th in the NHL. Even better than them is the Winnipeg Jets. They are 8-1-1 since December 1st, an .850 point percentage, which is number one overall in the NHL. They're averaging 3.7 goals per game, allowing only 1.8 per game. So the Bruins lost to Winnipeg, certainly not abnormal. And you could look at the overall record and see Minnesota, kind of a fringe playoff team over in the Central Division. They are second last in the division, actually. And if you look at the wild card race, they are only 2 points back of the Arizona Coyotes with the game in hand. So, again, if you zoom in even more, they're 7-3 over their last 10. They had won a couple games in a row heading into Friday's action. So it's not that surprising that the Bruins would lose to either of those two teams. Yeah, it's not the most encouraging thing heading into the break. It wasn't fun to watch. We wanted something to celebrate. We wanted to head into the break with the vibes as immaculate as possible. Did not happen. And there are some reasons for that, which we will examine here as the podcast continues. But big picture, the Bruins stumbled into the break, and things won't get that much easier this week as they try to shake things off, shake off the rust, shake off the turkey coma, and get back on track with 3 games coming up this week, which we will discuss later on in the show. But first, a word from one of our sponsors today, which we will get to here as the podcast continues. FanDuel has everything you need to make the game even more fun and engaging. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options like spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And it's not just for the NFL. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on the action for the NBA and the NHL as well. And again, new customers get a $150 bonus bet with any winning $5 money line bet. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on the action this NFL, NBA, and NHL season. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Boston Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. And speaking of YouTube, we've launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts from Locked On local and national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So the Bruins mired in a bit of a slump here, and let's be honest, it is a bit concerning, but it's also a bit to be expected. Nobody thought the Boston Bruins were going to be a first-place team last year, let alone this year. They had David Krejci, Patrice Bergeron coming back last year, went on this historic run during the regular season. They added a bunch of pieces, and so many of those guys are gone from this team. And if you weren't expecting the Bruins to be a first-place team last year, how could you be expecting them to be a first-place team this year? But that's where they have jumped to, and that's where they still sit in the Atlantic Division here at the break. They are 4 points clear of the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Florida Panthers. And while Toronto has a game in hand, they've played one more game than the Panthers. So yes, they've come down and regressed a little bit, but I don't think anybody was expecting them to carry a 750 point percentage over the whole regular season. That would have put them on a like a 120 point pace or something like that. The Bruins, to get 100 points in the NHL these days, you got to be at a 61% point percentage pace. Right now, even with this losing streak, they're down to 688. The Panthers, a very good team. They're 19-12-2. They're at 606. You got to think the Bruins are going to be in the mix with the Leafs and the Panthers for top spot in the Atlantic around that 650 point pace. And while that kind of regression is expected for the Boston Bruins, there are some concerning droughts personally that some of these guys are mired in. David Pastrnak has been fantastic this season. Over the last 6 games, though, where they've lost 5 of those games, he's under a point per game pace, 4 goals, 5 points in those 6 games. Your second leading scorers are Morgan Geekie and James Van Riemsdyk. They each have 5 points over those past 6 games. But Brad Marchand only with 1 goal and 2 assists in that span. Pavel Zacha missed 3 of those games. He's got 2 assists in the 3 games that he came back. But if you go further down the list, a lot of zeros here from some pretty key players. Charlie Coyle, 0 points in his last 6 games with a -4 rating. Hampus Lindholm, Matt Grzelcyk from the back end, 0 points. Grzelcyk did miss a couple games, but Lindholm, a -6. He's playing heavy minutes defensively, and perhaps it's catching up to him a bit. But even offensively from the blue line, they're not generating a ton. As Lindholm, Grzelcyk, 0 points. Charlie McAvoy, he missed a few games. He's only got 1 point in his last 3 games as well. And he was banged up in the Minnesota game. There was some question. In the Winnipeg game, there was some question as to whether he'd even play in the game against Minnesota on Saturday. He did play, but perhaps they would have been better served. Well, that's hard to say, but clearly he's not 100%. And Jake DeBrusk, who we've been talking about here, who needs to really get going, 0 points over his last 6 games as well. Of course, they're missing Matt Poitras. He was sent over to Sweden to play for Team Canada, but they really need some of these other guys to get going here. Coyle, DeBrusk, even Trent Frederick, only 1 goal, 2 points over his last 6 games. Some of these key players have gone a bit cold, and they need these guys to get back on track. Now, the goaltending, of course, remains pretty solid, but they can't save your bacon every single night. You can't expect these guys to steal games night in and night out. Since December 11th, when this kind of swoon started a bit, these guys haven't been on top of their games either. Jeremy Swayman with a .912 save percentage, which is still above average. Linus Ullmark at .902. I believe the average save percentage this season is .904. So they've been getting, slightly above average goaltending from these two. Definitely not elite numbers, but enough to get them victories. But the offense has just kind of dried up here, and that is a bit of a cause for concern. If you can't rely on these guys to get consistent production, especially from one of your top 2 centers in Charlie Coyle, who had been on pace for a career year. Again, everything has gone pretty well for this team to start the season, starting to slow down a bit. Overall, I don't think it's necessarily cause for concern. It's just about resetting expectations. If you expect this team to be challenging for the President's Trophy again, to be comfortably atop the Atlantic Division all season long. Perhaps how things started have skewed expectations a bit. I always thought they'd be kind of a middle of the pack team, maybe wild card, maybe top 3 in the Atlantic, a playoff team for sure. I don't think they're in danger of falling off completely. That would be a pretty epic collapse like we saw in the playoffs. But Jim Montgomery, I think, like I discussed last week, needs to get some consistent lines here going. And the Bruins just need to, put their heads down, get back to work, and they'll have an opportunity to do so later on this week. And we'll take a look at what is immediately ahead here as the podcast continues. Gametime is the best ticketing app out there, and there's a few reasons why. First of all, they have amazing deals on tickets for sports, theater, comedy, music near you. Easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. You get views from your seats before you buy, and they have a low price guarantee, which means if you find seats in the same section and row for less, they'll credit you 110% of the difference. You can find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets by downloading the Gametime app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed. All right, so what is next for the Boston Bruins? How easy will it be for them to get back on track? They're off. Well, the whole NHL is off again here today on Boxing Day. All eyes are on the World Juniors, of course. NHL action resumes tomorrow night, and the Bruins will be in Buffalo to take on the Sabres, a game that we will preview fully on tomorrow's episode. Then they'll have Thursday, Friday off, back home to take on the Devils, a team that they had a very tight contest with a couple of weeks ago, losing 2-1 in overtime. And then they are back on the road for a New Year's Eve tilt with the Detroit Red Wings. That is a 5 p.m. Eastern start that night. And then after New Year's, Columbus, Pittsburgh, and the Lightning before they go on a 4-game Western Conference road trip. So, Buffalo and New Jersey, all out of the playoff picture at the moment. Buffalo, well down in the Eastern Conference. New Jersey, only 4 points better. And they're having a rough go of it after impressing last season. Both teams outside the playoff picture, slim hopes for both, and they will, of course, be wanting to come out strong and beat up on a team like the Bruins to show that they are legit playoff contenders in the Eastern Conference. Detroit, they're kicking around as well, right in the mix. Only 4 points separate these 3 teams who are all on the outside looking in. But the East is pretty tight. You have New York in first with 47 points, Boston second with 44, but there's only 10 points separating them from 13th place Pittsburgh, and the Sabres are only 2 points back of them. Sabres are 12 points back of Boston, 12 spots below them in the standings. So the East is very, very tight. There's really not any room for prolonged losing streaks. Hopefully the Bruins got it out of their system prior to the break and will come back here strong. Now, a quick programming note. I'll be around here tomorrow to preview the Sabres game. Hopefully we'll jump on Thursday to recap what we hope will be a win that night. Then I'm off to Ottawa, where we will be visiting family for the holidays. And I'll try to well, I'll definitely get a podcast up from there on Friday and maybe also on Saturday to tee up the New Year's Eve game against the Detroit Red Wings. I had planned on jumping on over the weekend, but, things got busy with Christmas and spent a lot of time kicking it with the fam. I hope everybody had a great holiday. I know it's hard for some people, so just know that you're not alone that way. And we'll be back here tomorrow to break down tomorrow night's Sabres game and bring you all the latest here on the Boston Bruins, because we are the Locked On Podcast Network, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. Woo! Holidays, am I right? Your team every single day. Happy Boxing Day, friends. We'll talk to you again here tomorrow.